Welcome back, everybody. Today we're diving into the story of Mohamed Morsi,
Oh, yeah.
Egypt's first democratically elected president.
It's a wild one.
And it's a story that feels like something straight out of like a political thriller.
Yeah. Yeah.
This is
Absolutely.
rise and fall.
It is.
And you sent us some really interesting audio from History Daily.
Yeah.
And we're going to try to unpack all this and figure out what happened during this pivotal moment.
It's a story of hope
Yeah.
and ambition
Yeah.
and power struggles
Mm-hmm.
and ultimately tragedy. And I think it's a really stark reminder that the path to democracy is rarely smooth,
Yeah.
Especially in a region with such a complex political landscape as the Middle East.
Yeah. And to understand this story,
Right.
I think we really need to understand just the backdrop of everything.
Sure.
Egypt had been under this authoritarian rule under Hosni Mubarak for decades.
Right.
And, by the early 2010s, discontent was simmering.
Yeah. And then in 2011,
Yeah.
the Arab Spring erupted.
The Arab Spring.
This wave of protests and uprisings
Right.
across the Middle East and North Africa,
Mm-hmm.
and it reached Egypt
Yeah.
with massive demonstrations in Tahrir Square,
Tahrir Square.
demanding Mubarak's resignation.
Wow. Can you imagine, being there, the energy, the crowds, the feeling that history is being made right there?
Absolutely. It was a really transformative moment, and
Yeah.
it worked.
It worked.
Mubarak was forced to step down, ending his 30-year reign.
Wow.
But here's where things get interesting,
Okay.
because it wasn't a clean break.
Right.
Instead of a transition to democracy, a military council stepped in,
A military council.
promising elections, but also clinging to power.
Oh, so they're kind of like,
Yeah.
they're filling the void, but
Yeah.
are they going to give up that power?
Exactly. And this is where the Muslim Brotherhood enters the picture.
Okay, the Muslim Brotherhood.
Yeah, this Islamist organization
Right.
had been a powerful force in Egyptian society for decades,
Mm.
often operating in opposition to the government.
They had a really complex history,
They did.
right? They were providing social services,
Yeah.
advocating for Islamic principles in public life,
Right.
but also facing periods of persecution.
Absolutely.
So, it's like,
Yeah. And when the political landscape shifted so dramatically,
yeah.
the Brotherhood was ready to seize the opportunity.
Yeah.
They already had a strong base of support,
Mm-hmm.
and their experience navigating Egypt's political system gave them a distinct advantage.
I see.
Yeah.
So that leads us to Mohamed Morsi,
Right.
a prominent figure in the Muslim Brotherhood.
Yeah, the audio actually starts with a very vivid scene.
Okay.
Morsi waking up in a jail cell.
Oh, wow.
In January of 2011, imprisoned amidst the anti-Mubarak protests, he hears the chaos outside the tear gas.
Oh, my gosh.
The sounds of prisoners breaking free. It's almost cinematic.
Wow, I can only imagine what's going through his mind.
Right, talk about being thrown into the heart of a revolution.
Yeah, talk about a rude awakening.
Right. And then just over a year later, he finds himself running for president.
Oh, wow.
Now, what's interesting is that Morsi wasn't even the Brotherhood's first choice.
He wasn't.
Their initial candidate was disqualified. So Morsi steps in, runs a whirlwind campaign, and ultimately wins the presidency in 2012.
That's crazy.
Think about that, from a prison cell to the highest office in the land in a matter of months.
Wow, it's like a movie.
It is. It's
Yeah.
a really incredible story.
What was the mood in Egypt like?
Oh, it was a mix of euphoria and anxiety.
Yeah.
Many Egyptians were genuinely hopeful,
Hmm.
believing that democracy had finally arrived, but there's also a sense of caution,
Right.
a knowledge that the military was still lurking in the shadows.
Yeah.
They weren't fully gone. They were still there.
Still pulling the strings, potentially.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And Morsi himself seemed to be aware of this tension.
Okay.
The audio describes his symbolic oath in Tahrir Square,
Right.
the very heart of the revolution. He emphasizes that his authority comes from the people,
Right?
not from the military establishment.
Not from the military.
And there's that striking image of him refusing to wear a bulletproof vest.
Really?
Some saw it as a courageous act, a sign that he trusted the people. Others viewed it as a calculated political move,
Right.
a way to differentiate himself from the old regime.
Right.
I'm not like those guys.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm one of you.
I'm with the people.
Exactly.
Either way, it's a powerful image.
Yeah.
Sure.
And then there are the promises releasing political prisoners, improving foreign relations, creating a modern civil state for all Egyptians.
Okay, those are pretty broad promises.
They are.
Were those realistic?
Well, that's the key question.
Yeah.
And even in those early days, there were signs that trouble was brewing.
Oh, really?
Yeah, the parliament had been dissolved. by the military just before Morsi took office, and they'd issued a series of directives that essentially gave them control over key aspects of the government.
So they're undermining him from the beginning.
In a way, yeah. They're not fully letting go.
So you have this newly elected president who's trying to assert his legitimacy and trying to, fulfill the hopes of a nation.
Right.
But the military is still there?
Very much a force to be reckoned with.
Yeah, it sounds like a recipe for conflict.
It was, and things were about to escalate dramatically.
Oh, boy.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, it really felt like Morsi was...
walking a tightrope.
Walking a tightrope. Yeah.
From the very beginning.
Yeah.
Trying to usher in this new era.
Right.
While navigating the
shadow of the old
regime.
The old guard, yeah.
Exactly.
And it seemed like as the months went by, that tightrope got thinner and thinner.
It did.
So walk us through those early challenges.
Okay.
What were some of the biggest hurdles he faced?
Well, one of the first things he did was try to dismantle the old guard within the military.
Okay.
He reinstated Parliament,
Okay.
which had been dissolved by the military council, and forced several key military leaders to resign.
That seems like a pretty bold move, considering...
It was.
You know how deep-rooted the military is in Egyptian
It was very bold.
society and politics?
It was, and while it might have appealed to his base, it also made him some powerful enemies.
Right, because now you've got
you've alienated
the military against you.
Yeah, you've alienated these powerful figures.
It's almost like he was trying to run before he could walk.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it.
Yeah,
he was trying to move too fast.
Yeah, and then came that decree.
Right. In November of 2012, Morsi issued a decree that placed him above judicial oversight.
Above judicial oversight.
He argued that it was necessary to protect the revolution from counter-revolutionary forces and to speed up the transition to democracy.
But it seems like that really backfired on him.
It did.
I feel like that's when public opinion really started to turn.
Yeah, you see, while some people saw it as a necessary evil, a way to push through much-needed reforms, many others saw it as a blatant power grab.
As a power grab?
Yeah, like he's trying to become a dictator.
Wow, so the very people who had celebrated his victory in Tahrir Square are now protesting against him.
Exactly.
In the same square.
The very same square that symbolized the hope of the revolution.
Wow.
Now became the epicenter of opposition to Morsi's rule.
What a dramatic shift.
It's really incredible, isn't it?
It really shows you how fragile those early days were.
It does.
Yeah, that fine line between hope and disillusionment.
And the military, of course, was watching all of this unfold with great interest.
Oh, yeah. They're loving this.
Yeah.
They're seeing their opportunity.
They saw an opportunity to reassert their authority.
To get back in.
And they weren't shy about taking it.
So they saw weakness.
Absolutely.
In his handling of this decree.
They saw a leader who was losing control.
Right.
Alienating even his own supporters.
Yeah.
And they used that to their advantage.
And so how do they do that?
Well, in July of 2013, they issued a 48-hour ultimatum to Morsi.
Demanding he step down.
Not explicitly.
Yeah.
They said he needed to meet the people's demands, address their concerns, or face intervention.
Okay, but it sounds like a thinly veiled threat.
Oh, it absolutely was, and Morsi knew it.
He knew it.
But instead of trying to negotiate to find a compromise, he doubled down. He gave a defiant televised address.
Oh, boy.
Vowing to defend his elected office with his life.
Wow. Did he really think that he could stand up to the military?
It's hard to say for sure what was going through his mind at that moment.
Right.
Perhaps he overestimated his own support or underestimated the military's resolve.
Yeah.
But whatever the reason, his defiance sealed his fate.
And so they made good on that promise.
They did.
They removed him from office.
It was swift.
What happened?
And decisive.
After that?
General Abdel Fattah el-Sisi.
El-Sisi.
The same man Morsi had appointed as defense minister announced the president's removal on state television.
Wow.
He framed it as the military fulfilling its civil duty. Protecting Egypt from chaos.
Protecting Egypt from chaos.
But it was undeniably a coup.
I remember seeing the footage of tanks rolling through the streets of Cairo.
Yeah.
I mean, it must have been a terrifying time for a lot of people.
It was a deeply divisive moment.
Yeah.
Some people celebrated the military's intervention, seeing it as a necessary step to restore order.
Right.
Others were horrified.
Yeah.
Recognizing the dangerous precedent it set for democracy in the region.
Yeah. What happened to Morsi?
He was immediately detained by the military and held incommunicado.
Incommunicado.
No contact with the outside world.
Wow.
Then came a series of trials
Okay.
on charges ranging from inciting violence to espionage.
It all sounds very politically motivated.
It's hard to argue otherwise.
Yeah.
Many of the charges seem trumped up, and Morsi was often denied basic legal rights.
Well, the audio mentions a really chilling detail during one of his trials.
Oh, yeah.
Morsi, defiant to the very end,
Yeah.
kept shouting, "I am the president of the republic."
Yeah. He refused to acknowledge the legitimacy
Wow.
of the court.
Wow.
They eventually soundproofed his cage to silence him,
They soundproofed his cage.
just so they wouldn't have to listen to him anymore.
So they wouldn't have to hear his defiance.
Exactly.
That's heartbreaking.
It's a very sad story.
This guy was once a symbol of hope for,
Yeah.
a nation.
The hope of a nation.
And now he's reduced to this prisoner, silenced and forgotten.
It's a real tragedy.
Didn't he die in custody a few years later?
He did in 2019 during another court appearance.
Oh, wow.
Morsi collapsed and died.
Wow.
His death under those circumstances really underscored the brutality of the system that had ultimately crushed him.
It's a reminder that there's a human cost to these power struggles.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it raises the question about Egypt's future. What does this mean for a country
Right.
when their first democratically elected leader is overthrown and then imprisoned?
Yeah. What message does that send?
What message does that send?
To those who advocate for political change.
Yeah, it casts a long shadow over Egypt's transition
Absolutely.
to democracy.
And Sisi, the general who orchestrated the coup, went on to win the presidency in an election that was widely considered flawed.
Wow.
He's consolidated his power over the years, cracking down on dissent and essentially becoming the new strongman of Egypt.
So it feels like all that hope from the Arab Spring, that brief moment of possibility,
Right.
was dashed.
The audio calls it a lost dream.
A lost dream.
And while there have been some small signs of progress in recent years, Egypt remains a country where freedom of speech is restricted and political opposition is tightly controlled.
It's sobering, isn't it, that a moment of such promise could lead to such a disappointing outcome?
It is.
Yeah. What lessons can we draw from this, from Morsi's story, for other countries that are striving for democracy?
Well, I think it's a reminder that transitions to democracy are complex.
Yeah.
And often messy. They require more than just elections. They require strong institutions, a commitment to the rule of law, and a willingness to compromise and share power.
And vigilance.
Yeah.
A recognition that the fight for democracy is never really over.
Absolutely. Even in established democracies, we have to be mindful of the forces that can erode those freedoms,
Right.
that can chip away at the foundations of a free and open society.
Well, this has been a truly illuminating deep dive.
It has been.
Thank you for guiding us through this really complex and often tragic history.
It's been my pleasure. It's important to remember these stories,
Yeah.
to learn from them, and to never take our own freedoms for granted.
To our listeners, thank you for joining us on this journey. And if you're interested in learning more about the Egyptian Revolution, the Muslim Brotherhood, and the ongoing struggle for democracy in the region, we encourage you to explore the wealth of information available online and in libraries. This is just the tip of the iceberg, and there's always more to discover.